Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We are on AM 950 Radio. If you want to stream, go to am950radio.com and meet my morning stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe there and then click the bell so that you can be notified whenever we come up with any new content. And I thank you for your patience because I've just been overwhelmed. You all know that this is a self-produced show. So I'm doing I'm finding the topics, I'm doing the research, I'm finding the guests, and boy, oh boy, it takes a lot of time. But we're going to get things right, and we're going to be coming up live again fairly soon. And so we'll be able to talk with one another in real time. And I'm excited about that. But in the meantime, please join the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and on my Facebook page, Santita Jackson and Friends, so that we can communicate with one another. Yes? All right. Got a lot to talk about today. We're going to be talking about what has happened in the aftermath of George Floyd, particularly. I know this hits everybody all around the world. Everyone who saw that footage was we were just all devastated by it. People from every single background. Some people who had never really thought about civil rights or civil liberties. When you see someone lose their lives in real time, it's just devastating. We felt that way about Rodney King. I'm sure if they'd had a camera trained on Vincent Chin, we would have felt the same way. And when Reginald Denny was pulled off that truck during the Los Angeles riots, and he was a white truck driver, but then you saw a black neighbor in Compton run out of his house to rescue him. It's just unbearable. So there's something in the human spirit that is decent, that is loving, that is kind. But we always have to fight to keep our better angels uplifted. So let's talk about what happened, what this report that we saw in The Guardian, Defending Rights and Dissent, Sue Udry, their executive director, brought this to my attention today. And I wanted to zero in on that, not just for the AM 950 radio audience who are in Minneapolis where the killing of George Floyd occurred, but because this resonates with us everywhere, all around the world. And as we're watching the encampments broken up violently, you have to wonder, where are the police going? And so we're going to hear from you, Sue Udry, and the rest of our panel. And in the next hour, we will be talking about a host of other issues. Let's talk about this border policy of President Biden. What do you think about it? What do you think about it? Is it a political move? Is it a wise move? And what are we really doing? Because we have a border policy that's going to restrict movement from the South, brown and black people, but not from the North, Canada, where you have the most visa overstays. I don't know. We're going to work it all out one day. We will. So everybody, please join us in Chicago. Lenny, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later. We are going to have the Rainbow Push International Conference, Sue. I hope that you or Chip can get in for it. The 13th through the 17th, leading into the Democratic Convention, which goes from the 18th to the 21st. We want to channel all of this energy that people are bringing to Chicago in a positive way. And we're looking to have seminars about, Gabe, how to run for office with no money, because you can do that and you can win. Really, what's going to happen if you get to the polling place and you're an ex-felon or you are a convicted felon waiting to go to prison? Can you vote? Many of our judges, they mean well, but they don't know. I mean, it's just, there are so many issues that are facing us right now. And as we move into the fall, what should you demand of not just the presidential candidates, but everybody? And remember, we've got to start voting down ballot. Understand that all these little judges, all of these trials that we're looking at, these judges were elected. They were elected. So you need to start demanding that these judges appear before your sororities, fraternities, in your churches, on your block, because you pay them and they are the ones who have power over our lives. But let's start off with George Floyd. May peace be upon him. And boy, oh boy, it was prophesied to him that he would change the world. And in many respects, he really did. He did. And I don't want to be remiss, because the Poor People's Campaign will have your national campaign, your national convention, June 29th in Washington. We're working with you to have a watch party at the Rainbow Push headquarters. For those people who can't get to Washington, we are going to have a party in Washington, and we encourage you to reach out to the Poor People's Campaign so you can have watch parties where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Where you are. Poverty, that is what Dr. King was killed. Dr. King was killed working on poverty. And he said, you can't have this war in Vietnam. You can't have these wars and have the war on poverty at the same time. Something's got to give. Well, the war on poverty gave, and look at here where we are. We're more poor today than we were 60 years ago. So let's get right to it. Of course, one of the elected police commissioners from Detroit, Michigan, Attorney Linda Bernard, brilliant, brilliant lawyer. Indeed, she has won 3 cases before the Michigan State Supreme Court. In her other life, she is also a civil rights activist. And she's also the first African American to get a master's in law from one of the great Ivy law schools, UPenn. And of course, Lenny Brody, one of our veteran activists. Can't say enough about him. He really kind of sparked something with us about organizing, learning how to organize block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, town, city by town. That's how you make the difference. And of course, we need to have you do a seminar on that so that people can learn how to do it. How to do it. Organizing there's a science to it, shall I put it. And of course, someone who you can mentor, Gabe Drobny. Brilliant political organizer, young man who has knocked on 30,000 doors here in Chicago. And wow, wow, what a bright future he has. He's looking for people to support. We love Gabe. And of course, Sue Udry, I can't say enough about the work that she does as the executive director of Defending Rights and Dissent. At a time in which it seems that more and more of our rights are being constricted, they're being restricted. Norman Solomon, an icon of the left, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, Sue, he wrote an op-ed piece that he published on Facebook, and he was calling for peace before one shot was fired. He said, hey, we don't even have to fire a shot. Let's negotiate a peace, and then we can move forward. We can work this out. He was banned from Facebook for 2 weeks. To kind of let you know, I mean, you can advocate for war, but if you pick it for peace, you go to prison. Something to be said for that. But what is going on in the wake of, it's been 4 years. It's hard to believe, Sue.
Yeah.
It's been 4 years since we watched George Floyd choked to death. We can never thank Daniela Frazier, that 17-year-old child at the time. We can never thank her enough for pulling out her camera, for sending her 9-year-old cousin into the store. Because of her lived experience, this child knew where this was going. And she pulled out her phone and live streamed it, and she changed the world. Let's not forget that. But see, what has happened? There's a report that you have really helped to amplify. Something that you've noticed that's disturbing, a disturbing pattern with the police in the wake of George Floyd. Talk to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Santita. It's so nice to be here with you and with everybody else. Yeah, so our organization is a civil liberties organization, which is very closely tied to civil rights, but it's got a little bit of a different twist. And we were, our whole staff was engaged in the George Floyd protests here in DC. I was outside the White House when Trump cleared the streets and went to sell his Bible in front of the church right there on 16th Street. Yeah. That's how you know he's a master reader. He can read upside down. So we knew firsthand the way that the police were treating protesters. But what you said earlier, Santita, is really true, is that people saw that video of George Floyd being murdered and just the callous disregard for his humanity of the police officers, not just Derek Chauvin, who was kneeling on him, but the other officers who were preventing anybody from saving George Floyd's life, right? So,
and they were threatening people.
yeah,
They were menacing.
I mean, they're like, this totally nonviolent man who is accused of a totally nonviolent crime. They've got to subdue him in this way. So people did take to the streets all over the country. There were over 7,000 demonstrations in more than 2,400 locations all across every single state in this country, and people who had never protested before joined protests. It was huge, and so from the point of view of the police and law and order types, this was a problem because mainstream America was calling for change, right? And so you could see it start from the very beginning when Attorney General Barr, within a few days of the protests start, was calling them Antifa and domestic terrorism and, violence, and this must be stopped. And then Trump did his Bible thing. But all over the country, we saw locally that mayors and police commissioners and the police unions were really pushing hard on this narrative that the protesters were violent. And so we wanted to look into the lawsuits that protesters had filed against their local police and their cities to see what's the story that these lawsuits tell. And the story that they tell is, yes, some protesters threw water bottles or broke windows or committed arson. These are crimes against property, right? But the police committed crimes against human beings. The police, who were heavily armed, who were dressed like RoboCops, who rode to the protests in armored personnel carriers, that were built for Iraq, but then came home from war and were given to local police. So police had a mindset of, we're going to war. And they got on this, they hit the scene, and there are, some protesters were trying to protect themselves against tear gas with umbrellas, which doesn't really work. And so the police use that as an excuse. Oh, these people have umbrellas. And the amount of violence and the false arrests against the protesters was all over the country. We studied 130 lawsuits that have settled. It takes forever, to get through our criminal prosecution system, and so the lawsuits are getting settled very piecemeal. And like there was just one that was settled yesterday in Columbus, Ohio, but with
in 2024.
In 2024, and it's just like it's such a slow process. But cities have paid out over $150 million to protesters who were harmed by police, and some of the harms are grotesque. People getting a rubber bullet shot into their eye and going blind. I could tell you just a gazillion stories, but the overall narrative, the overall truth is that the police escalated dangerous situations and caused serious harm to unarmed protesters.
We're speaking with Sue Udry, executive director of one of our leading civil liberties organizations, really in the country today, Defending Rights and Dissent. Speaking of defending rights and dissent, by pushing back against these demonstrators, these protesters, with such harshness, I'm not going to even say just rigor and vigor. I mean, it was just harsh, and deadly, which is what we're seeing in the encampments now. I mean, these peaceful students who are conducting classes, they're eating communally, they're welcoming people. they are being attacked as. And in UCLA, the police stood down for 3.5 hours as they were beaten viciously. And then the counter protesters were not arrested, but the students were. But it's just at the University of Chicago, the police showed up um, in SWAT gear, riot gear, at 4:40 in the morning. Sue, what is that? I mean, is this designed? Because I don't think anything in the political world happens just, they're acts of God and they're conspiracies. You can call them what you will. Just, I've been in the civil rights space all my life. And, the only time Dr. King's march ended in violence, it turns out it was a young black man who went to Morehouse who was connected to the CIA. I mean, that's just how this works, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is this designed to really crush dissent, to make you unwilling to come out in March?
I believe so. And I believe there's a reason why the police show up in riot gear, right? It's not that they really think that they're going to get hurt. It's to give an image of they are going into danger, right? And it's just a bunch of college students sitting around in tents, right? They're not armed. They're not going to hurt the police. They're not even resisting arrest for the most part, or if they are, it's not in any kind of violent way. So I think it's all part of an overall strategy, yes, to silence protest.
So where do you see this going before I spread this out to the rest of the panel? I mean, what does this mean? I mean, because if it's $150 million today and we're still seeing these lawsuits settled 4 years later,
Yeah.
and we're doubtless we shall see more with the encampments, and only heaven knows what's going to happen in Chicago. I mean, we just had the head of the Secret Service and our chief of police meet. Lenny, you saw it. We've got this under control. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm a little anxious because people are not coming here to be violent. That's not what they're doing. They're just simply trying to express their point of view, which is what we're supposed to be allowed. Maybe you're the civil libertarian. You help me. I know that the First Amendment really has 5 pillars. It's not just speech, it's religion, it's
right.
The right to assemble peacefully. And it's just, I mean, what are we looking at here?
Right. And free press. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a many-pronged attack on the right to dissent and the right to protest. I would say in our big cities that are blue, controlled by Democrats, it's really the police. In New York, in Chicago, in Seattle, in San Francisco, we see police really cracking down violently on protests of the left. I will say when the MAGA folks were out protesting, when the anti-vaxxers were out there protesting at the same time as the George Floyd protests, there was a noticeable difference in the way police deployed.
Oh, come on, Sue, they were the police.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not angry.
No, you're right. You're right.
Because they have the choice to vax, not vax. I don't care about that. I really don't. But I mean, that's what you saw with January 6th. There are 24 to 2,500 police on the Hill every day. 3/4 of them were not there that day.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Trump had called for the National Guard a week before he was denied.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Help me with this.
Yeah.
I'm not taking up for anybody. I'm just trying to figure out, what are you doing here? What's going on?
Yeah. I don't know. But so in the blue states and cities, you've got police cracking down, but then in red states, you've got all sorts of legislation being passed in the states to pile liability onto protest organizers, so that if you organize a protest and something goes wrong, you're liable for whatever damage, or they've lessened the penalties for drivers who hit protesters in these red states. So there's this whole slew of bills.
They don't hit them; they drive into them.
Right, exactly. It's not like, excuse me, or you're Kyle Rittenhouse. You can go ahead and shoot a protester.
No, my mother will drive me
Yeah.
from out of
Yeah.
state so that I can shoot up people.
Yeah.
And no one is dragging this mother out to find out what's on her mind and calling her an irresponsible parent.
Right. Right.
Oh, oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Before, as we move this around, um, Attorney Linda Bernard, you are a
Yes, ma'am.
police commissioner showing us your badge. Yikes.
Mm.
And and you're also someone who has done battle on behalf of civil rights. I mean that's part of the reason that you ran. To fully disclose, I've known Attorney Linda Bernard practically all of my life, and I met her. She's just become this commissioner. I met her marching and demonstrating and protesting. Then she went to work for Coleman Young, Mayor Coleman Young, as in his historic administration.
Yeah.
So she has done this and she's done that. So what is going on here?
A number of things are going on. First of all, may George Floyd continue to rest in peace. And his family, of course, has been well remunerated as a result of his death. People, and so have many of the organizations, the protest organizations that you've been speaking of. In Detroit, when we didn't have riots in Detroit. Nothing was burned down. I think maybe one window was broken. We did in Detroit what should have happened in Washington the day of the rally that Trump had. Because as you pointed out, he had told them to bring in the National Guard. We didn't bring in the National Guard, but we had all 3,000 police on duty. Where the protesters were congregated, we set up parameters and certainly mobile every kind of thing you can do, because we were determined, and actually I supported this, that there was not going to be riots and burnings and killings in Detroit like that, like what you saw in other cities, and the looting and so forth in Chicago even. It to me it bastardizes even George Floyd's memory and what he stood for that day when he was trying to become free, trying to breathe, and he called for his mother. Mm-hmm. So when there's going to be an event, the police department automatically, or they should have, they automatically mobilize, all hands on deck, so that you can keep the peace. Our community was offended by the fact that police had on riot gear, the shields and all that stuff. But as we saw in Washington after George Floyd's killing, the protesters there were spitting on the police. They had their shields down over their face. They would walk up to them, spit on them, and do all kinds of stuff, which incidentally is an assault, and which something you can be arrested for. But we didn't have that in Detroit. The community is active here. The Black community said, we're not tearing up our city like we did in '67 when we had the rebellion here, and like 20 people were killed and billions and millions of dollars in property damage. We're not doing that. But we marched, we had speeches, we had things like that. Now, a couple of people were hit with, I think maybe 3 people with like a rubber bullet or something like that. And so they sued us and said that the police force was unnecessarily rough. So the chief and the chief's office vehemently objected to that characterization. Nonetheless, city council, there was a lawsuit, and city council voted to pay an organization called Breathe Detroit, I think about $1.2 million, which went to about 5 different people who said they had had a negative encounter with the police, as well as organization Breathe Detroit. So I think that a lot of it has to do with the leadership in your community. The mayor in Seattle was terrible. There is no way you're going to occupy 4 or 5 blocks and set up perimeters and say the police can't come through, emergency vehicles can't come through, all this. I mean, they were just way out of line. there, I think a lot of it has to do with how the community feels about the police department. Our community really likes the police department, black and white, and they work with him. And we have so many initiatives in the community that the police are part of the community for the most part.
But but it seems that, but when we're talking about community policing, that's very different than what so many Americans experience, Attorney Bernard.
Right.
So I mean, because police, unfortunately, have gone from serving and protecting to being enforcers.
True.
I mean, and they're not officers of the peace anymore. They're here to get a piece of you. And it's unfortunate. I mean, because I know a lot of great police officers who are great human beings who don't go onto the force wanting to do that. But I think one of my bigger concerns, even with that, is the shutting down of dissent in America. And that's what I'm seeing. And, and I, Sue, you and I spoke a little earlier, and, you can do much more, under a blue administration with the Democrats. You could do more. You could have more right-wing policies enacted. You could do more right-wing stuff with a black face in a high place and with a woman in place, because it's a softer, gentler face on it, but it's still achieving the same aims. Look, I'm just keeping it 100, because I don't play skin politics. I think identity politics go so far. At some point, where are you in terms of your principles? What are we trying to do here? What kind of society? Hold on, Attorney Bernard, Lenny Brody, and because you all have been shaking your head.
I just want to make one little point. We have a white mayor and a black police chief, and I've had a white mayor for the last 12 years. That's all I want to say.
And he's done a lot of community outreach, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And then you've got Rashida Tlaib. And Detroit has had a history, to be fair, of people reaching across lines. I mean, even Mitt Romney, many people don't realize he was so mistrusted because his father walked out of the '64 Republican convention because they refused to take a meaningful stand on civil rights. He's not been trusted because he's always been an independent. He was his father, George Romney, who worked with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the union leaders. He was like, you all have got to be kidding. You can't disenfranchise all of these people. Lenny Brody.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most impressive things in the aftermath of George Floyd was the moral outpouring of the American people. There were demonstrations and protests in small towns all over the country, and it really resonated with the morality of the American people. And I think that video hit people. And it was a very important thing that the demonstrations were so broad and so peaceful that the impact of that, I know on me, it gave me faith in the American people, that when they see injustice, when they really get the real story and see injustice, they will rise to the occasion and protest.
So, Lenny, but before you continue, did the fierceness of the protest surprise you? I mean, because it just popped up everywhere. You saw white housewives coming out.
Right.
Like, I can't believe I just saw this.
I know it really impacted me. I couldn't believe the breadth of the protests and the kinds of people that came out. It really, to some degree, restored my faith in the American people. Now, on the other hand, there was just a press conference in Chicago about the Democratic Convention with the Secret Service, the FBI, and the Chief of Police of Chicago. And originally, the chief of police had said peaceful protests will not be bothered. Now he was saying that just because a protest is peaceful, if they are breaking the law, they will be arrested. In other words, if you spill over into the streets, that's illegal, and different things like that. So I'm really concerned because, to tell you the truth, historically, the police have been responsible to the powers that be, the people who have money, and when the people in power say something, that's what the police the FBI and the Secret Service do. And so I'm afraid, this change of the attitude of the chief of police in Chicago, I think, is going to be a dangerous thing. And I know we have a progressive mayor. I know we have a lot of progressive older people, but I don't think the city is in control. I think it's the FBI and the secret police. And so I think we're going to be in for some trouble in Chicago during the Democratic convention. And that's why I think it's so important that Operation Push have its convention right before that, and really that we provide a narrative of what's going on, why people are protesting, and what the rights of people are, and what the needs of the American people are. So I think we're going to be in for some difficult times, I guess.
Sue and Gabe and Attorney Bernard, I just heard Lenny say something that was just really stunning. The secret police,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, why did you amplify that?
They're the people who protect the president and all these other officials, and that's the secret. They're the Secret Service, but
Yeah.
but that's what in fact they are. They're really the Secret Service and the FBI are going to be running the show. It's going to be quite dangerous, I'm afraid.
And the Secret Service, of course, come from the Department of Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying. Gabe, you're hearing everybody, and you're hearing Sue, this brilliant civil libertarian, and you're hearing Attorney Bernard, who is a police commissioner and a civil rights activist. I mean, if I feel better having not just someone like having Linda Bernard as a commissioner, because she's going to seek fairness, because that's what she's been fighting for all of her life, and she hasn't stopped there. Lenny Brody witnessed 1968. So anytime he's saying, as an organizer, someone who's been organizing more than 50 years, I have a bad feeling about August in Chicago. And Sue, I keep hearing it from people over and over again, particularly those who saw 68. Everybody's shaking their heads and they're saying, this will not be good. Well, because I'm wondering, are you going to open up a McCormick Place, one of the huge convention centers that holds tens of thousands of people, and put people in there? It just seems like they are ready. Gabe, what do you make of, just the police? Are you surprised by the police just finding out that $150 million is not an inconsequential sum of money for people who are literally, these were peaceful protests. Some of these folks broke windows and things like that, but no one could figure out where they were coming from, because marching is an effort. Most people don't want to do it. So, and they're not going out. The person who pays property taxes and all of that, you are not going out to break up anything because you don't want to drive your property values down. So.
But so many protesters are, as Gabe probably knows, are professional protesters.
Mm-hmm.
They get paid to do this. They come into Detroit and they come and they are,
they come everywhere.
The hot issue is Israel. So, that's.
But when they're paid, they're not. They're saboteurs. Typically, they're agents. They are agents provocateurs. They're not genuine protesters, because you have trained protests. That is, the people that paid they're not paid protesters. They're provocateurs, and we need to call them that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to call them exactly what they are, because they're not doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing something else.
My challenge that I arise to the activists is what happened to George Floyd was horrid. But if you look today at the BLM movement, did it really help Black people? And what do I mean by that? It was corporatized. It did destroy a lot of small business owners. And did it really help Black people? I really do think that a lot of the progressives did use it for political gain. And if I have worked in Black communities and they're hurting, right? So do those same aristocratic, affluent, progressives, do they really, really aid the Black community? I would argue no. And that is where I do scratch my head and I look at the hypocrisy. Do they go into those neighborhoods and mend the bridge? Do they go to the Rainbow Push? I don't feel it. So that is where I really do challenge a lot of activists. You're seeing there's still food apartheid, job apartheid, transportation apartheid. Are Black people really living better in 2020 and today as they are in 2020? You could argue that it's gotten worse. So I really do challenge the activists that were out there at the forefront. I am from an affluent suburb. There were marches here in my suburb here in the Chicagoland. And I just always challenge these progressives. Do you really care about Black people in all honesty? Or is it just for political gain and votes?
Well, and they should, because, there's an old expression that my great grandmother used to have, Sue. When Black folks get a cold, when white folks get a cold, Black folks get pneumonia.
Yeah.
We really are the canaries in the mine. I mean, now you see white folks have Black problems. They don't see any way of advancing in this society at all. Who can send their child to a college undergraduate that costs $100,000 a year? I mean, are you serious? And when you go onto those campuses, you don't see a lot of American students there. I mean, listen, I'm no one's crazy nationalist, but I do love my country. And I do want citizens to have an opportunity to fulfill the promise of the dream.
Right.
And more, we don't have that. And I want to be able to talk about that, Sue.
For sure.
But this is making me anxious about, well, not me, but it can make one anxious because I'm like, look, people are going to do what they're going to do, right? I mean, my father was talking to Dr. King when they killed him. And, I'm from the kind of background that you got to be willing to die on this. And this, as my mother said, there's something, they were running for president in '84. And they were trying to hurriedly get to the plane. She had just finished speaking. And she was carrying her bags. This is in those days, Gabe, you could walk with your friends to the gate. And this man was behind them behaving very strangely. And because they had so many death threats and she had a police escort, but my mother's friend said, look, Jackie, let's hurry up and get on this plane. And my mother said, no. And she dropped her bags and she turned around. She said, if he's going to do something to me, he's going to look me in my eye and do it. And she stood there and waited for him. And then he ran in the other direction. So it's like, really? And I'm just wondering, Sue, where is this going? Because it seems increasingly that Americans are in a box. I can't post on Facebook. I'm called a protester, not a demonstrator. No one's taking up for me in corporate media. Nobody. I mean, I'm a troublemaker.
Wear it proudly.
Yeah. So where do you see the police going with this? Because it seems like this is a policy that's coming from on high to handle these demonstrators this way.
I think there is. I think it plays out differently in different cities. And I can speak most directly in DC because I live here now. And our police, our city council adopted a law for the way police are supposed to handle protests. Probably about 20 years ago now, after they kettled a bunch of protesters in a park and arrested everybody, even though some people were just walking through the park. Anyways, got a big lawsuit and got a new law passed that the role of police at a demonstration is to facilitate the First Amendment rights of the citizens, of the people of the city. And so our Black Lives Matter protests were not treated violently by our local police. it was that Trump incident when it was the Secret Service and federal and park police, U.S. Park Police. So it was not our local police. So our local police, because we have so many demonstrations here, of course, but they, we would have a Black Lives Matter protest, which were happening nightly. And this was during COVID, and we would take to the streets, and the police would cut off, block off traffic, and we would march. And then also, I would also speak very defensively of the Black Lives Matter organizers here in DC, who do come from east of the river, who do come from poverty, and who had a vision of a city that is mostly Black, that is going to actually benefit the Black people who live here. And again, this being during COVID, they organized mutual aid where people who had lost their jobs could, people could collectively pool their resources and provide food and help for people who had lost their jobs and that sort of thing. So I agree with you that nationally, the Black Lives Matter, the folks who led the national movement went down a wrong path. But I think in a lot of cities locally, the lead activists actually do come from Black neighborhoods that are under-resourced and come with a real passion to, the first job is to keep Black people alive. And when police are allowed in so many places without accountability, without transparency, to kill people, then that's a problem. I mean, it's very difficult to prosecute a police officer for killing an unarmed person because so many, because the justice system is not geared towards that.
But Sue, I'm hearing you and Attorney Bernard say something very similar. That when you have police who are from the community, who are familiar with the community, who are familial with the community, it's very different. You have different outcomes.
But they are and they aren't. More than 50% of the police force in Detroit is suburban and white. About 49 maybe percent may be African American. But the police, there's no residency requirement in most cities and states anymore, where a public person, other than the mayor, he has to live in the city, but no other employee has to live in the city, and that includes police and fire. So that familiarity with the community isn't really there, but we try to make up for it through neighborhood policing, through community meetings between the chief and the community. Every precinct meets they have walks and ride-alongs with the police and all kinds of stuff to engage the community. But it's not like it ought to be if in fact we had officers who lived in the city. And they don't live in the city because of schools. And in many instances, their wives say they will leave them if they live in Detroit, because they don't want to live in Detroit. They want to live in the suburbs where there are more services and everything else. So, it's kind of like an oxymoron, but we do our best. And here we've been pretty successful. The community here really does support the police. It's amazing, but they do. And I do what I can to, of course, involve the community in everything as they are, and the chief does as well. So they're involved, but lots of times, Gabe, as you know, and Lenny and Sue, the police get it wrong. They get it wrong, and you can't really judge the effectiveness or what the of the police department. You can, not the effectiveness, but whether or not they're doing the right thing till you look at their lawsuits. We have a zillion lawsuits. The lawsuits are the barometer. Whether it's George Floyd getting about 25 million, I think his family got 25, 26 million. To anybody else. And I tell people that when because we have a complaints office. COPA in Chicago has a complaints office as well. Citizens can file a complaint, and that complaint is investigated. And sometimes there's discipline against an officer or something like that. the real sine qua non, if you will, for complaints is in litigation. Because when you say that the police officer said something or did something to you and it was wrong and and all this kind of stuff, then there are damages associated with that. And the community, but now the cities have gotten smarter. Like if I have a complaint against the Chicago Police Department, it won't be resolved in Cook County. The city will take it immediately into federal court, which could take it outside of Chicago, or depending on how your district courts are set up, they're your federal district courts. So they're aware of the bias of the community against the police. So the city moves, files a notice of removal and refiles the case in federal court, which makes it more expensive for the litigant and a lot of other things. But they still get a lot of money. Usually there'll be a few minorities on the jury at least.
Lenny Brody.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and one of the first political activities I took up was for a civilian review board of the police in New York. And over 50 years, there have been efforts to control the police. And I really think people miss the point if they think they could really do something in relation to controlling the police, because the police ease off when they're not needed, and they crack down when they're needed, regardless of the laws. They turning on your body cam, they just don't do it when they don't have to, when they shouldn't, because
but they're disciplined for that. If they turn it off, they're disciplined for it.
Yeah, they're disciplined, but the action still is carried out. See, and my experience trying to get control of the police for 50 years is that the city governments run you around in circles. Right now in Chicago, we have this crazy kind of police control thing where people have to run to get elected in 24 areas in Chicago, and everybody is all wrapped up in getting elected, and there really is no control over the police.
I'm elected, and several are appointed. 7 are elected by district, like your wards, and 4 are appointed. So,
right. But I think the activists get run around in circles trying to get elected and then trying to figure out what to do, when in fact the chief of police said peaceful protests at the convention will be accepted, and then he said they won't. It's really the political conditions that determine the role of the police. And this goes back to history from the period of slavery and the overseers and the KKK. Whatever is needed to control the people is carried out. And I think us as organizers have to understand the only way to slow the police down is to organize at the base and to make a reaction so intolerable that it slows them down at least. But I think the long-term solution is the people at the bottom have to get elected and take over the government, so that the government is run in our interests, in the interest of poor people, not in the interest of the people with money. Because no matter who's elected, if they're supported by the people in the money, they'll do what the money says, because that's what they need to get elected. And in Chicago, we're beginning to organize to elect people on a totally volunteer basis. My ward organization, nobody is paid. In most of the independent political organizations in Chicago, nobody is paid. It's all volunteer. And we elect people, and they meet with us, and we have this co-governance approach where the elected officials work with the people at the base who organize, and if they don't do right, we don't continue to elect them. And people know this. So I think politics is the determining factor, and how much power you have and how well organized you are is what determines what happens. And we don't have the power to stop the Secret Service and the FBI at this convention. I'll tell you that. And so we have to be very careful.
Well, I have a couple minutes left, Sue. And Gabe, of course, I'll be with you in the next hour. And Lenny, the power is with the people. But people have to know that we have the power.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Because all of these injustices are allowed to proliferate because we don't push back. When we push back, things change, Sue. And I'm just hoping, but the way we change things is to express dissent.
Mhm.
We can't do that. Things won't change. What's your prescription? Dr. Sue, write it up for me.
Well, we've got a bunch of recommendations in our report. I think the top recommendation is to just demilitarize the police, and I think that works beyond the way that they police protest. Right, when police appear someplace armored with an AK-47, they've got a mindset, and I think that's problematic. I think increased accountability and transparency of the police. And I think also, as we've seen work in some places, police need to understand that I believe police also take an oath to uphold the Constitution, right? And the First Amendment of the Constitution is the right to peaceably assemble and the right to dissent. And so they really need to, the police need to be empowered to facilitate protest, not to try to shut it down, not to immediately think if people are protesting, they're doing something wrong. I think that's the key.
Well, we're not supposed to be silent in the face of injustice, everybody. You have an obligation to speak out and to work nonviolently. Bayard Rustin said
I agree.
His genius was that he led a virtually bloodless revolution. The people who shed the blood were the people who needed the most help. And now every American's in that position. Actually, that's always been the case, but now everybody is seeing it. So don't let people shut you down. And if you see someone in a march who's trying to stir up trouble, isolate them. Don't touch them, but let them know that they have no place here. Don't play with them, and don't let them play with you, because if we don't have dissent in America, where will we be?
Right.
The nation was born of dissenters. They had a revolution against the king and the queen. I mean, come on, y'all. That's what they did. That's how Americans do this. If we don't have dissent, then we can't be American. The last 30 seconds belong to you.
And it was born of, frankly, a nonviolent demonstration, the Boston Tea Party, that did actually destroy property. I don't like destroying property. I don't think it is tactically the way to go, but I think it's just an interesting point that we glorify that and get angry if people, turn over a trash can or throw a rock through a window, which I'm not endorsing rocks through windows.
I'm not either, but I will tell you, these paid actors, they're not demonstrators.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what they are. And we need to be very, very clear on who's doing what. You had people who were in the encampments and the counter protesters. It turns out that they were paid to come together. That's what's come out.
Mm-hmm.
And please, I've been in the civil rights movement all of my life. I already knew that. And I knew the corporate media were in on it because they wouldn't call them who they were. They polished up their name. I'm like, no, they're not counter protesters. Don't you dare give them the honor of being a protester. These people behaved thuggishly. And they sought to hurt people and worse.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody, the power is with the people. And we are the people. We can make some change. Attorney Linda Bernard, sending you so much love today. Brilliant attorney. Well, she's a commissioner with the police in Detroit. But you can see she's fighting for the people. And it's good for us to have you there. Thank you. Lenny Brody, thank you for teaching us and reaching us. And I'm so excited about all the things we're going to be doing at the convention, the Rainbow Push Convention, and the watch party that we're going to have at Rainbow Push on June 29th. For people who can't get to Washington, D.C., you can still be part of the convention, the Poor People's Campaign National Conference. We're going to bring it on home to Chicago. Gabe Drobny, keep on knocking on those doors, young man. I love it. And to Udry, you and Chip Gibbons and your team at Defending Rights and Dissent, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being the great patriots that you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, because that's what you are. Dr. King was a great patriot. Bull Connor was not. Munch on that, everybody. In the next hour, stay tuned for the Santita Jackson Show. We've got a lot to talk about. This border. Wow, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Linda, you want to come over there so you can be the bomb thrower? Back with more.